So we know that forest fires, are becoming widespread. But the one thing that strikes me as odd is we don't have any action ready to go aircraft that are already backlogging up all of this floodwater, fresh water, in silos somewhere to fast fill aeroplanes like the fire brigade. You know, when London was burning, let's make some fire engines. But why we don't have any that are on the ready to go and swoop in as soon as there's a forest fire? I always think that those really big aeroplanes were drawing out the plans to put a humongous, they can lift the weight of these water tanks and the amount of water that they could drop. It would take a few of these aircraft to fly back and forth. I think this was when the Australian fires were happening. Drafted this concept up. And if as soon as you get the call come in, there's a fire spreading, these aeroplanes to go and drench, but not using salt water, using fresh water that's been collected, you know, everything keeps flooding, rivers keep bursting their banks. So I would have some sort of side river just to hold this, even if it is stagnant a little, and you drop it on not just the burning fire. Some planes take coordinate strikes to drop it, and they just back and forth until they're completely empty. I mean, that's a lot of flight time. And then other aircrafts that are exactly the same then begin to fly on the more vegetated area that's more dry and dampen it all down to at least one, try and slow down the burning, because they'll have to evaporate that before it gets going, and then drop all of this water and just keep going until the fire extinguishes. I think it would probably be far more beneficial to have these at the ready. And wildfires are becoming a common thing. House fires weren't so common, and then all of a sudden they started to become common, and then it was kind of counteracted with the fire brigade. So I think that if there was some technology to be built that could be attached to certain trees, that as soon as they detect high levels of heat, it sends an automatic, like a Bebo, that sends automatically to the nearby, let's say, aircraft fire service, if you want to call it that, military. They get the message that there are some real high heat temperatures, and they can then start to go and drop the water on there already. I think would be more beneficial to then stop the fires. And then if they are arson, at least if the fire got ablaze and you had these coordinated, a bit like Sea Boys really, where they let you know the wave height and different things like that. I think if we had the same in forests, they'd just be the early fire warning system that then gets the action plan going and gets crafts up in the air, dropping tons of water that are already filled, ready to go and on standby, these aeroplanes, if you like. And then more closer to the season, you know, as it's going to get hot, it's going to be a fire season, or it's dry, or there's been not enough rain, artificially go and drop the rain in the areas, and that's one way to counteract it. Another one is when it gets ablaze. The problem is time. No one's coordinating enough in those situations. I would feel that there's not enough on standby, and then everyone's trying to play catch up to whereabouts it is. And yeah, I think that every second that goes by, I think the fire is moving more and more and more, and trying to fight the fire with fire engines, I don't think it's working. And then perhaps some pipelines going into it, drain some water. Again, this could be detrimental to the rivers, but widespread, I think it's more detrimental to the area as a whole, because it takes a while to grow all of that back. So yeah, I think more faster action plans in that would be necessary. I can't remember the name of those planes now. They're the military ones and they can take an awful lot of weight. Plus, with looking at the biggest silo that you can get and fill it with water, even if it was carbonated, if it was carbonated, I don't know, fizzy water. And why would it be fizzy water? Well, that's going to hamper the fire's ability quite a bit. So, and again, that can then add some pressure. That if you could drop a carbonated block in there somehow, or compress it with carbonated gas, this would then help it force it out of the aircraft. Because I think that altitudes and different things like that might play a factor. But if it was carbonated, You don't need a pump to pump all of that moisture out of there. You could just use a carbon block and have certain valves underneath the aircraft. But there again, I don't know if too much pressure messes up the dynamic of the flight. I doubt it. Aeroplanes seem to cope pretty well when they fly in rain anyway, and if these were situated underneath the aircraft, away from any of the engine intakes, I wonder how that would work. But again, if it's carbonated, you've got to be careful of the engine, I think, is going to be something. So if it was back end of the craft as opposed to anywhere near the front, and then there's that pressure, I wonder how that would work in the aircraft's slipstream, if you want to call it that. The movement and the fast jet out of the back, or how that water or mist will respond to that. It's very interesting. I'm very curious about that. And then would it be able to then coat and cover a larger area? The higher up you go, the more widespread it is, isn't it? The moisture will fall. You want quite a bit to come out. And if you had a fair few planes like that, man, especially if it's in America, they've got the military might for it. They've got the crafts. They got the know-how. And then strategy. One's going one way, one's coming back the other way. At a certain height. They just keep going back and forth. When these ones are coming to land to refuel and, more importantly, refill the water container, others are already there en route, and then they're dropping. So there's no break in the chain. Yeah, and then to artificially make rain, if you like, in that way, carbonated. And again, carbon is very good for nature, so it loves it. Salt, not good, definitely not good. And salt has an ability to dry the soil out more so, and dry the vegetation, and then the vegetation that grows around the forest, we got it here. I don't know if it's any different in America, to be honest. But that vegetation, when dropping out salt around these areas, that stuff no longer grows. So, whereas more of the hardier stuff doesn't quite mind it, but you rely on that smaller vegetation to be drawing out moisture, because that's what roots do essentially, and then they evaporate when it gets hotter, and the more hotter they get, the more they evaporate, so the more moisture they pull, which is very interesting. But yeah, trees tend to do it top canopy, especially if you've ever taken a bag and wrapped it around the branch to get water and survival. You'll know that. It's much more higher, but it relies on something lower to coat up the trees, which is the small vegetation in all the pockets of light that you get. And if you look around the edges of all forests, they're almost impenetrable, aren't they? You can't get into them because of the foliage, if you want to call it that. So the stingers, the brambles, all of it. As soon as you drop salt there, that disappears. And then you lose that moisture drawing at trunk level. Yeah. And then when the trees are evaporating it sort of creates an updraft. Although very subtle, but it's still there. So, yeah, not salt water, but carbon. This is good for trees. And if we could collect carbon in that way, and put it into the water, you're moving it closer to the forest anyway. So if you're extracting it from the atmosphere, so it would take like a fire alarm with a sensor on it that is able to take the, I want to say molecule, but I don't know if that's correct. Carbon molecule, and grabs that, knows when it's got an oxygen one and rejects it. I mean, quite an interesting type of technology to build. And it takes the carbon and puts it into a cylinder, if you like. Want that one, want that one, want that one, want that one. And then slowly but surely, especially if these were at the side of a motorway or anywhere else like that, they will be drawing out that carbon. And when it comes time, this can be added to the water on the go and then dropped into the forest. And the forest, where it will go down at the roots, hopefully, well, we'll go into the air, perhaps fizz out before it reaches. I'm not really sure. There will need to be a bit more science engineering into that. Carbon pellets in it. Weird, but strange. Again, much more better than salt. And this gets into the roots, where I think it's where it's most important to get to the tree anyway. And then we're just sort of moving the carbon and using the carbon as opposed to a bad thing. We're going to use it as something that's very good. In this situation, this is very good. And then we can start to use it to an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage. And then hopefully the trees will be able to convert that and make more oxygen. Runs away, and hopefully it starts to has another sort of natural way of dealing with. You got the best of both worlds. One, you're dealing with carbon, and two, no more forest fires. So, yeah, something like that. But the military and that sort of fly the aeroplanes there. When doing piling and construction work, there was this thing called a pump. Where it's cement, concrete, cement, either or, and it pumped this through into the rig, into the big rig. This thing is quite capable of pumping water, because when cleaning out the pipes afterwards, you'd fill it with water and different stuff, but still mainly the water at the end to try and clean out. Yeah, that pumped that stuff pretty quick. So making a pump that's like that, that's much more quicker, and have multiple of these on a cylinder that it just gets pushed into the back of the aircraft, the empty one gets taken out, plane gets back up and gone, the other one's then returning empty, swap this one out while that one's gone, this one's now filling up with the pumps. Yeah, I think that could work, especially with that. And some sort of carbonating, again, scientists, we need to get around to make something where we could take the carbon from here, either store it in a block, add it into the water, and yeah, it's a good place to discharge it over a forest. It makes use of it. It loves it. Yeah, somewhere like that. But there we are. Boosh.